Let's talk about paternosters and rosaries and the Christ child. Portraits of children in Europe didn't start to appear until the end of the 15th century. In fact, the portrait as we know it only started to develop after this time. Before this, portraiture was typically religious in nature. And so, portion of my evidence of children wearing jewellery is about Madonna and Christ child paintings, like these two. And the item of jewellery that the Christ child is wearing in these is a paternoster or rosary. You can see him holding the rosary here and a coral rosary here. Let's read what I have to say about that. Paternosters and rosaries were portable strings of beads used to count prayers and were typically only associated with European Catholicism. The practice of repeating the Paternoster, the Lord's Prayer, dates from the 4th century in Europe, and only later in the 11th and 12th centuries was the recital of prayers aided by Paternoster beads. These substituted recitations of the Psalms as a technique helping those who were illiterate, for example, retain the information by memory. As the Virgin Mary's holy status grew in magnitude, prayer beads with Ave Marias, Hail Marys, began to be used from the mid-12th century, and by the 13th century there was evidence that paternosters, and those including the Aves, were being produced on a larger scale. It was not, however, until the 17th and 18th centuries that the actual term rosary was in widespread use for these prayer beads, the name being based upon the rose, which symbolised the Virgin Mary herself, who was the rose without thorns. The significance of the Christ child not only being adorned with paternoster beads, but seemingly using them to count prayers, was a reminder that even the holy were not above reproach, and that children as well as adults needed to adopt the ritual of prayer. This is highlighted by the detail of the Holy Infant counting his prayers from Grunewald's Altarpiece, which was commissioned for a hospital church that cared for plague victims, those obviously in need of prayer, at Isenheim in Alsace. And you can see that painting here, where he's counting his beads, counting his blessings. Similarly, in the other Renaissance image of the infant holding his paternoster beads, he points to a book in which he appears to be instructing the Virgin Mary, perhaps to recite her prayers or even the Psalms. In a visual sense, such religious images may simply have been used to remind the onlooker to say a prayer upon passing. So in this image here, he's pointing to the book whilst holding his rosary beads.